Well, I think the Great Bay Area has always been a very critical part of global trade, right? I still remember back 20, 30 years ago, right? The ports, right, in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, right, were one of the major paths of how goods from the factory of the world, right, is going to the West. So I do think that, increasingly what I see is that some of the high-tech manufacturers, right, a lot of the Shenzhen technology companies, right, I think they are actually using not only physical trade, but there's a lot of things like, innovation. There's a lot of things that they are also influencing global trade. So I do think that in the past, we have been physical goods in China, factory trading outside. In the future, part of this trade is going to be technology, ideas, IP, data, other things that we will be influencing global trade. So I do think that Greater Bay Area has always been great at trade. I think will be great at trade, but the nature of that trade might shift from just physical goods to also things that are beyond physical goods.
Hello, Joe. Thank you so much for your time here with us today. So to start with, we know the world economy is full of uncertainties. So do you still believe the next China is in China?
Well, if you look at the economic growth of China in the last year and also projections of this year, China is still going to be between 32 to 34% of global growth. So one of the things that we fully believe that in the next 10 years, there is no other region, country, or other cooperation bodies that can replace the growth of China. As IMF said, Chinese growth is essentially the foundation of global growth. So when I said the next China is China, I fully believe that there was no substitute. So the next China is something else. The next China has to be China. But of course, we also need to find ways how to have more sustainable growth in the future.
Mm-hmm. So for the companies, should they keep investing in China? What opportunities China present for them? And how can they win in the next China?
Well, I've been talking to a lot of CEOs recently, and I think that a lot of CEOs are actually thinking hard around how to invest to build the next era for their companies. I do think it's different, right? I think in the past, it was a lot around volume. It was a lot around getting more penetration into lower tier cities. It was a lot around getting to scale. I do think that the next 10 years is a lot more around, we call it more granular growth, meaning that you find growth in very specific pockets, right? It's no longer one size fits all. I have a product, I get a lot of marketing, and everyone comes to my platform. I don't think that model works anymore. I think it's a lot more granular, it's a lot more specific, it's a lot more segmented. And I do think that for the companies that feel like they have the technology and the thinking to do that, they are investing because they still see a lot of growth. I still see a lot of entrepreneurs who are seeing a lot of growth right now in the market, although obviously it is a slowing growth.
Mm-hmm. So for your clients, what are the most concerns when they investing in China?
I think the concerns is really around competition. I think China is the one market in the entire world where the competition pressure is very fierce and it's very fast, right? Any product in China that sells well, in 3 months' time, in 3 days' time, okay, there'll be many, many other competitors in the market. I think that ferocity of competition, we don't see that in other places. Many multinationals CEO tells me that they have never seen anything like this in terms of the pace of competition and also the price competition that's seen in China. So for a lot of CEOs, what they are most afraid of is that competition or the over-competition, oversupply going to hurt their profitability. And when price comes down, the entire industry doesn't make any money. I think that's what people worry about.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word competition. And with all those competitions and uncertainties we saw, how do you think the Chinese companies have been performing in recent years?
Well, I think Chinese companies have done, relatively well, right, in terms of global competition. When I look at Chinese companies in what they do well at, from the manufacturing to the ones in the industrials to the one that does a lot of export, I think the Chinese companies who are doing well right now are globally leading in terms of their efficiency, their supply chains, their costs, their value for money. I think they're very, very good. I think obviously, there's still a lot to do, right? One of the things that I have been saying a lot is that technology usage. In the past, I think that Chinese companies are very, very good in using technology to reach customers because China is very digital. We have lots of digital customers on the mobile phone, on the apps and all that. I think the next 10 years, I think we can use technology a lot more to lower our costs, to be a lot more productive, raising our productivity in general. I think there's still a lot of potential, right, for Chinese companies to do better. But the leading ones are globally leading right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, just as you said, we saw more Chinese companies are going overseas. So what are the key factors for their success in overseas, and any suggestions do you have for the companies?
I think Chinese companies have a lot of potential overseas, right? I mean, they have in China mastered, the product, the innovation cycles, the value for money, supply chains, the manufacturing to create some really, really good products at some really, really good prices, right? So in some ways, that proposition should carry very well overseas. However, when you go overseas, the problem is that, well, the customers are not exactly the same segments that they are over here, right? What works very well in China may not be as attractive, right, in overseas. The second one is around talent. I think Chinese companies are really in the early stages of embracing global talent, right? I think one of the things that really needs to happen is how are we going to attract the best global talent to come to work for Chinese companies? That's one where we really need to think a lot about it. The third one is around local regulations, and also, stakeholder management, local customs and culture. I think there's still a lot that we need to learn. So in the past, I think Chinese companies, we were the factory for the world, right? We sell globally, but we weren't truly global companies. I think in the next 10 years, I look forward to multinational companies from China. And I think that really would be something that we'll be very proud of. And I look forward to those companies. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, so for the multinational companies that already operating in China and probably will be entering the Chinese market, what suggestions do you have for them? And what do you think the business environment in China and in Shanghai has evolved over the years?
Yeah, look, I think China has been such a wonderful growth market for multinationals in the past 20 years. When I was in CDF, the China Development Forum, last month, right? I think many, many CEOs talked about having been in China for 20, 30, 50 years. And they have businesses at this stage that is between 15 to 50% of their global revenues are from China. So I think global companies have done very, very well in China in the last couple of decades, right? In the next coming years, I think all of them will have to think about how do they compete in the next decade, right? I think that some of the growth, some of the market penetration, they've already accomplished that in the past. The question is, how do I continue to grow? How do I continue to find propositions in a market where the local competitors are also growing up very quickly and are actually pretty good right now? So I do think that it will be a more challenging market for multinationals, but I'm also very confident that those that have been dedicated, focused, have the right talent, understand China very well, they will continue to do fabulously. I think that there is no other market that can replace the volume and the potential for China market, but there will be some that will find it much more difficult. And there will be some that are just in any economy will not do as well. So there'll be winners and there'll be some losers. And the question is, how do we enhance our opportunity, the chances to be in the winners category?
So how do you think of China's economy this year or going forward? What's the perspective?
Yeah, I think 2024, we're now in April. I think it will be a year a little bit like last year. I think that we're in a kind of medium growth. We're still getting used to the supply and demand in many industries. I think people are getting used to, I think the medium kind of growth rate we have right now. I do see some promising signs though, right? When I look at, consumers, right? I do think that, consumer confidence is at a low level, but it's no longer dropping. I think that there is, plateauing, and, I think that there are signs where this can recover. If I look at some of the industrial outputs, right, I see some promising signs. But I do think that there's still some of short-term challenges that we need to overcome, right? We need to overcome some of the real estate problems that we have. We have some local government financing, platforms and vehicles that also need to figure out how to, get more cash flow. We do have in some industries where I think that the whole oversupply, right, is a little bit a situation that we need to get back in shape. So I do think that there are some short-term challenges. I have confidence that it will be a medium growth for us, and for those who are in the market, I think it'll be a decent year.
Also, accelerating the development of the new quality productive forces will be important for China's future development and also economic growth. So what your understanding of this concept?
I think we're all trying to figure out like how this plays in China's future, but undeniably globally, right? If you think about some of the high-tech manufacturing, if you think about some of these industrial sectors, if you think about sustainability, and how you think about solar, wind, EVs, batteries, and all these. Look, I think these industries are the industries of the future. I think these industries are very, very important, and every single country in the world is trying to figure out how do we, get more investments, how do we get better at these. And I think China actually is quite ahead in some of these, right? If you think about some of our sustainability, whether it's wind, solar, and some of these, I think that we actually have gone to a scale that is actually quite leading in the world right now. If you think about some of these batteries and new electric vehicles, right? I think that we've been also again quite advanced. So I think the new productive forces, I think it's just part of the economy that's going to be very important. I think as we go towards more higher quality and our salaries, right, and the average income is rising, I think we need to get into more high value add, side of the production cycle, right? And I think that these segments are the segments that we want to be good at. So, I think that is something where we are well on our way, but I think that right now certainly is a highlight, right, of every government is trying to think about that as well.
Well, that brings me to the Greater Bay Area, because the Greater Bay Area is perhaps one of the most vibrant and innovative region in China. So how do you think of this area plays a role in China's development?
I think Greater Bay Area is critical to China's development, right? If you think about all the technology that's coming out from the South, right? In the past, it has been manufacturing. I think in recent years, it has been innovation and digital and all of these technologies. Now, some of our biggest internet companies, some of our biggest auto manufacturers, some of our biggest software companies are in the South. I think that's just a huge productive force, right, for China. But look, I think that we're playing in a global market. We're playing the market where it can be from Greater Bay, it can be from the Yangtze Delta, it can be from the north. But at the end of the day, I think that it's a competitive world. And I think that, where, I lived for many years, right, in Hong Kong, I worked a lot in Shenzhen, right? And I think that this story, right, of how really Shenzhen as the anchor point, but a lot of the cities around the Greater Bay Area have actually been very, very innovating and very leading edge for many years already, right? And I think going forward, obviously, that is a very, very important part of the role. I'll put one more point is really around, Hong Kong and also of the international side of it, right? I do think that Hong Kong as the international center for Chinese, especially on financial side, on some of the professional services, I think it's also very powerful, right? We have, right, an outlet where the Greater Bay Area, right, can also leverage upon. So if you think about all the things that you need, right? Professional services, manufacturing, innovation, digital, and all these technology, all the new, biotech and all that, health tech, it's all there, right? So that economy and that power, right, I think, certainly is a fundamental pillar, right, of Chinese growth for the next decade and beyond.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think of the entrepreneurial spirit in the Great Bay Area?
It has always been very strong, right? I think the South has always been a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, right? I grew up in Hong Kong, spent a lot of time in Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and I feel like it has been a culture of entrepreneurs, right? Over there are no big companies to give us jobs. Right? Everyone has to go and innovate and make your own living and find your way to innovate. And I do think, if I think about the last 10, 20 years, I do think that the Greater Bay Area and the South has actually been a very important part of that equation. And I think it continues to be. So I think that the great thing about both the Chinese economy, but also around the Greater Bay Area, is that each region has their own value add culture, some customs, and some of the human spirit that is slightly different, but they are all, I think, adding to the bigger picture. So I think the entrepreneurial spirit in the South and in the Greater Bay Area is a fundamental hallmark spirit in these people. And I think that remains, and I hope that remains strong, because I think the entrepreneurial spirit is part of what will carry China into the next decade to be strong.
Well, I have learned that you started your own business when you first graduated from college. And also you have talked a lot CEOs. So what do you think makes a good business leader?
Very good question. Maybe 2 points, right? I think the first point for business leader is that they have to look ahead. I think many people are very good at doing what they do today, right? But much fewer people are good at looking ahead, or sometimes I call it looking around the corner, right? So the better leader you are, the better are you looking at something that's around the corner. Something you cannot see today, but it's coming. And your ability to see that, your ability to influence other people, to come with you together, right? Trust me, it's around the corner, but we got to change because it's coming. I think that is actually very important. So I think the difference between a leader and someone who is an executive is the ability to see beyond and to see around. So that's the first one. The second one, I think a leader has to be positive. I do think that today there are so many reasons to become a little bit negative, to maybe feel like there's a lot of challenges. Maybe you feel very overwhelmed. Maybe you feel like a lot of things are not in your own hands. But the best leaders are always the ones who understand what they can influence and try really hard to create conditions for you to succeed, right? And I think that positivity, that level of can-do spirit is also part of what makes great leaders great. So I would say that these are probably the two hallmarks of a great leader.
So how do you think the business, especially like multinational business, can better adapt to today's environment?
Well, I think that we have to take uncertainty as a given. And I think that more we embrace that this is just the world is going to be like this for the next 20 years, and we better get used to that. The faster we are into that mindset, the better off we're going to be. In the last 1 or 2 years, we've been talking about a concept called the resilient company. What's resilient? Resilient means that, when there's a typhoon, when there's a storm, when there's a flood, when there's an earthquake, I can get through it, right? In the last few years, we've seen, COVID, we've seen different lockdowns, we've seen different geopolitics going on. I think companies have to kind of figure out, how do I respond quickly? How do I be more agile? How do I think about the difference between, long-term and short-term? How do I balance that? How do I, be more equipped to deal with uncertainty. And I think the muscle, right, the agility muscle, the resilience muscle is one where the more we exercise that, the better the companies can deal with, all this that we talked about. So I do think that, for multinationals and for Chinese companies, learning how to build up our resilience, I think it's probably one of the major lessons we've learned for the last couple of years. And I think likely will be the differentiation between who can get through the next storm and who cannot.
Mm-hmm. And AI is also a huge trend. So how do you think the AI will play a role in business transformation?
Yeah, look, I think everyone's talking about artificial intelligence right now, especially Gen AI has been a very big topic as well. Look, I think that we have seen this, right? Since the last 10 years, we've seen the economy go from a sort of analog economy to a digital economy, and now it's getting to a data economy, and it's getting to a Gen AI economy. So I think that these are technologies that will change businesses, will change consumers, and the more we embrace it, understand it, have people who can work with it, I think the more competitive we'll become. I do think that there will be a greater divide of companies. Those who can really embrace new technologies like Gen AI and those who cannot. And that group will become a lot more successful in the future. So I do think that all of us need to get better, right, at these and know how to use it. Not everyone can become the fundamental building block of Gen AI, right? That will become great, but all of us can figure out how to use it and make ourselves better. And I think that's a spirit of agility, learning, and innovation that, to be honest, have always worked, but I think that in this digital world will accelerate in this development. I'm definitely supportive of trying to figure out how to incorporate, AI and Gen AI into how companies can work and how individuals can work. I do think that there's so much there that can take away some of the things that we don't want to do in our work, right? If I think about our work, maybe I enjoy 30% of my work, maybe 30% I don't really mind. Maybe there's 40% that I don't like to do this work because it's repetitive, it's boring, it doesn't add a lot of value. I think, Gen AI and AI can help us with a lot of that part. And if that part is taken care of, I can enjoy my work and my life a lot better. Of course, we have to think about the downside or the negative aspects of this, right? In terms of, look, AI also needs to be a technology that we need to have the right regulations, that we have to have the right societal awareness about, because it may also lead to some bad behavior, or it might lead to some areas that will be counterproductive to what we do, of course, right? But in every single technology, there's an upside, and there's always a little bit what we need to regulate and prevent and help. But I think we should always do that. We should be very aggressive and very ahead of the curve in dealing with that. But we cannot stop technology from getting ahead, because that's what makes us more productive. That makes us a better life, and that's what I think we need right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what role do you think China will play in this regulation and the promotion of the use of the AI in the future?
I think China is placing a very high emphasis on how do we regulate this, how do we think about it. China is at the forefront of thinking about this. But in many things, I think that technology always runs ahead of regulation. So we need to also keep up with the thinking, right? Otherwise we're behind, right? How the technology can evolve. But look, I think that right now, Gen AI and AI around the world, every government is trying to find ways. How do we, make it a safer, a better technology for all of us? And I think China is definitely also in the leading edge of that thinking. So I hope that, other countries can learn from China as we regulate Gen AI. And globally, I think Gen AI can bring in another era of prosperity. And that hopefully will also bring the world in a better place.
We talked about a lot of bright side. So what will be the key challenges lies ahead? And moving forward, how can we overcome those challenges?
I think the key for us is to keep learning. I think that in the uncertain world, what happens is that many things can be very scary because we don't understand them. Many things can be very frustrating because it's not the same as before. So I do think that we need to be very humble. I think we need to keep learning. I think we need to keep adapting. And I think these are difficult qualities. I think for most people, they would rather things be the same and I just continue my life, right? But learning, relearning, adapting always calls for people to do a little bit more than what they think they should. And I think that that's probably the challenge that we all face, because as leaders of companies, you have to inspire a lot of people to change and to learn. And that's not easy. But I hope that, in bits and pieces, at least in China, I think that we are very adaptive. I think we are very resilient people. So I do think that in this ever-changing world, I think that, we have a lot of conditions that should allow us to be successful, but it's hard.
Thank you so much. That's all the questions I have today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.